Hello everybody, thank you for coming tonight. I just want to thank Michael Slattery. Michael's going to talk to us about fire detection and alarm strategy in apartment buildings. I don't think I need to say any more. Michael, off you go. Thanks so much.
Good evening everybody. I'm going to speak about this rather boring subject, but I'm going to inject a little bit of controversy in it to make it unboring if I can. I suppose the issue in terms of fire alarm system in apartment buildings, there's a level of conflict in recommendations between different documents, and there's a need to kind of deal with these conflicts going forward. And I think there's a challenge being presented to designers like ourselves as fire consultants, to fire officers in approving systems, and there is a bit of variation out there in the industry as to what is the right level of coverage and what's the right approach to designing fire alarms in residential buildings. And they're complicated because of the domestic nature of the apartments and then the common areas in a large apartment block. Okay, so the design references are, for completeness, Technical Guidance Document B is the kind of parent document, and the sections in that deal with general provisions of means of escape and dwelling houses, which deals with the requirements or the recommendations on fire alarm coverage. There is BS 9991 2015, which deals with the design of residential buildings and primarily apartment blocks, but also domestic scale residences. Then you have IS 3218 of 2013, and then, it's read in conjunction with the 5839 Part 1 and Part 6, or is it, or where? Because 9991 refers to BS 5839, TGDB in respect of domestic alarm systems refers to BS 5839 Part 6. And then there's another document out there which kind of throws some light on the strategy in the UK in the design of apartment buildings and in the strategy for evacuation of apartment buildings and in the strategy of design for fire alarm systems in apartment buildings. And that's a UK Local Government Association guide for fire safety in purpose-built blocks of apartments or flats. And that's produced by a local government body with input from the Home Office or the Inspectorate of Fire Services, the Chief Fire Officers Association, and various parties, and that kind of represents the current thinking in the UK. So that's the kind of background documents. And if we look at first at individual apartments, what are the recommendations? And again, there's a level of I won't say confusion, but there's currently conflict. And it's something that needs to be ironed out between Technical Guidance Document B, 9991, and IS 3218. Technical Guidance Document B basically recommends that in typical case you should have a grade D LD2 fire detection alarm system complying with BS 5839 Part 6, and that covers the typical apartment. And what that means essentially is, mains, and most of you will probably know what it means, but I'll just go over it. A grade D means mains powered, battery backup, interconnected smoke alarms, smoke detection and integral alarm in them, interlinked. And LD2 means that you have detection in the common, or in the circulation area being the protected entrance hall, and you have detection in the risk area being the living room / kitchen. So you essentially will have two detectors typically in the typical apartment interlinked. So that's what LD2 means under Technical Guidance Document B and under BS 5839 Part 6. Section 10 of 9991 kind of doesn't give a particular performance. It basically cross-references to 5839 Part 6, but it says the objective of the fire alarm system is to warn the occupants of a fire within their dwelling, and to provide them with time to evacuate the premises being their dwelling, and to call the fire and rescue services. That's stated to be the objective. Table 1 then of the current 5839 Part 6 sets out that for the typical apartment, it's a grade D LD2 system, and that means detection in the circulation spaces, namely the protected entrance hall, and in the specified area rooms or areas that present a high risk, namely the living room, kitchen. 9991 has specific recommendations for the provision of enhanced LD coverage, domestic alarm coverage, in LD1 as a trade-off measure to allow duplex apartments without exit from the upper floor, to allow extended travel distances. There's a number of areas where you can get a trade-off from upgrading your coverage to LD1. And I suppose, yes, I'm kind of going back over it. So the detailed design 5839 kind of says LD1 is essentially detection throughout. LD2 is detection in the circulation spaces, namely the entrance hall, and in specified rooms that present a high risk. And LD3 is basically the escape routes only, the entrance hall only. So in the typical case, under 5839 Part 6, in the typical apartment, it's an LD2 system. And the LD1 is the higher grade system that you might consider to get a trade-off on some aspect of escape, means of escape within the apartment. Now, IS 3218 2013 has done it differently, and I'm not necessarily saying it's wrong or it's fundamentally wrong, but it's at odds with the current technical guidance that can be, and it's at odds with 5839 Part 6. It's defining LD1 pretty well the same, it's essentially throughout, and it's redefining LD2 from the previous definition to include bedrooms being in an LD2, and it's taken out LD3 out of the definition. So an LD2 system under the current IS 3218 is a system that has detection in all the circulation areas, which is the protected entrance hall. It has in the high risk areas, the kitchen, living room, but also in the bedrooms. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that I'm saying is a conflict that currently exists there, and maybe not understood by everybody. I'm saying IS 3218 versus TGDB and 9991, and it's a case of one against the other two. IS 3218 saying the minimum level of protection is an LD2 system where there are no unusual risks and where there's no floor greater than 200 square metres. So if you have a large apartment, it trips you into LD1, whereas compliance with TGDB and 9991, it's sufficient to do an LD2, which is the lesser system without detection in the bedrooms in the typical case, or an LD1 where you want to do an enhanced coverage. So there's something to be addressed there going forward. Now, the common alarm systems is where the greatest difficulty is currently arising. Section 414.14.4, the technical guidance that can be, in other words, is saying, and it has two very clear clauses. In a building containing flats where the compartment floors and walls are constructed of non-combustible materials, then it recommends an L3X system. It should be provided for the protection of the common escape routes and the flat entrance door to a place of safety. That's the current recommendation in TGDB for apartments with, shall we say, timber frame construction. But in buildings containing flats where the compartment floors are non-combustible, it's saying it's a type M system is all we need. Except if you have smoke venting systems in the common areas that require activation by detection, then you'll need smoke detection in those areas, but that smoke detection is purely for activation of those systems. Otherwise, it's a type M system. Now, in practice out there, a lot of the fire officers are kind of saying, we want a type L3X system regardless, and that's factually correct. There was discussion on this many years ago, and we were involved at the time in a number of appeals to Bord Pleanála on this very issue, and Bord Pleanála at the time ruled that a type M system was sufficient in an apartment building, in the typical purpose-built apartment building. And indeed many apartment buildings at that time basically had basic common alarm systems, purely to operate venting systems and no more. So there's an inconsistency. So I suppose I'm in the presentation. I'm focusing really on the apartments where the compartment floors are of non-combustible materials. You know, reinforced concrete floors are non-combustible construction. That's the majority of apartment buildings today. I mean, timber construction is limited in extent and allowance. So let's focus on that and say, right now, where do we stand against that measure in TGDB? Now, okay, if we then look at 9991, which is recognised as in department circles, recognised as the replacement for 5588 Part 1, and is being used by designers and fire officers. Section 10 basically doesn't generally recommend the provision of common alarm systems except in particular instances. And it's very clear. It says it might be appropriate for some common areas, lounges or communal roof gardens to be provided with fire detection and or fire alarm system. This should be determined on the basis of the extent and use of these common areas, the fire risk and the management response available. Where rapid summoning of the fire brigade is considered critical, and that's on the basis of a fire risk assessment, then provision should be made for automatic transmission of alarm signals to an alarm receiving centre. Automatic transmission should also be provided if you have high risk mobility impaired occupants, and that's really aimed at something like sheltered housing, which is covered in 9991. And then it's clear where systems are required in areas other than individual dwellings, say, to activate a smoke venting system. And again, in the typical taller apartment building, you'll have automatic opening vents, or you'll have automatically operated mechanical extract systems in the common lobbies. They need to be activated by detection of smoke. So you will need smoke detection on those linked to a common system, but that common system is for the purpose of activating the smoke venting system and no more. That's the view of 9991. It's interesting then to read in parallel the UK Local Government Association document, which kind of elaborates on the thinking in 9991. It's basically saying fire safety in purpose-built blocks of flats, and these are modern construction flats designed to building reg standards. The compartmentation between the flats is analogous to the party wall separation between adjoining houses. It enshrines the principle that a person's actions, while they may affect their own safety, should not endanger their neighbours. The compartmentation is a higher standard of fire resistance than normally need to protect escape routes, and accordingly it says, and these are all quotes, those in flats remote from the fires are safe to stay where they are. So it's the Stayput policies enshrined. It's Appendix 6 of the same document says it's not only unnecessary to provide a common alarm system, it's normally undesirable. And it goes on to say that there is a risk of evacuating residents who would be safe to remain in their flats into areas where they might be affected by smoke. And indeed, I mean, the statistics show very clearly that very rarely does a fire spread from the flat of fire origin to another apartment. Yes, the statistics equally show that it's not uncommon for the smoke spread from the flat of fire origin into the common escape routes, and with stack effects and wind effects, and basically the door is left open behind as people take their belongings out of the apartment, or for whatever reason, there's a high incidence of smoke logging of the common stairs. And if bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind equally the statistics that show that you're much safer staying in your apartment, if you have a common alarm system that invites people out to escape and they lose their lives in the stairs because of your common alarm system, it raises a serious question about the design strategy, in my view, and in the light of what's published. So it's not an easy question to resolve, but that's the background. It's basically saying here that smoke detection is provided to operate smoke venting as part of a common alarm system, but no fire alarm sounders should be connected to these detectors. So that's the Local Government Association document, which was prepared by a committee and was prepared as an ancillary supporting document for the continuing management of apartments, purpose-built apartments, with inputs from the various stakeholders, including the chief fire officers, including the London boroughs, including the chief inspector of fire services, whatever he's currently called, with a range of stakeholders. So the design philosophy, in my view, based on those documents, and that's okay, that's UK standards which we've adopted here. We've adopted 9991. Our technical guidance is broadly based on UK approved document B. The design philosophy is when a fire occurs in an apartment, the occupants in the apartment of fire origin are alerted. They then make their way out of the building. They alert the fire and rescue service by activating a manual call point, which is our Type M system, or via telephone. When a fire occurs in the common areas, anyone in these areas will make their way out of the building and alert the fire service. All other residents will remain in their apartment unless directed to leave by the fire and rescue services. That's the design philosophy in 9991. The design philosophy currently in TGDB, in my view, except in apartments that have, I'd say, of timber floor construction, which is a different issue. That the statistics, and again I'm quoting from the London the apartment guidance document. UK statistics in the period of 2009 to 2010, in a total of 8,000 fires, reported fires in apartment blocks in the UK. Only 22 of those fires required evacuation of more than 5 people. That's the statistics. So, you know, the risk to life in and equally those statistics show that the risk to life in an apartment block is a lot lower than the risk to life in a typical private house. The statistics show that. You know, so, and it's rare, I mean, I think again quoting from it, it's rare from somebody outside of the apartment of fire origin to die from a fire in an apartment block. So apartment blocks are pretty well designed, and I know we've had the Celtic Tiger, Priory Hall legacy, and at the end of the day, yes, there's potential issues with fire stopping, but I mean, I think most of the deficiencies found were in the common areas. Yes, there's evidence of some apartment to apartment problems, but really the statistics, you know, in the UK, and I think, I don't know what the statistics here, we don't have great statistics, but the evidence is you're safer staying in your apartment if your apartment isn't on fire. And there's a risk that this common alarm system that has detection all over the place invites you out, and you go into the common escape route and you lose your life on the way down because you get, you know, particularly in a taller apartment block, but could happen in any apartment block. And I'm aware of certainly 2 fatal fires in apartment blocks, where one I think was in Cork a number of years ago, where somebody, it was in an older building, but again it shows you what can happen. Someone had were housing their motorbike in the entrance hall at ground level, and the motorbike went on fire, and there were 2 or 3 people lost their lives as a consequence of that fire. Now those people might have been better off staying in their apartment. And there was another fire that I think we were involved in investigating, where again the fire happened in the common area, not in the apartment. So if there's a fire in the common area and the alarm system invites you out into that common area, you're potentially you most certainly are much more at risk than if you stayed in your apartment. Sorry, I'm gone backwards, I think. This thing is... Yeah, okay, I'd maybe have to, yeah. So essentially that's TGDB and 9991. Now I think the issue is then, I think the issue we have at the moment is, okay, if we design to TGDB and 9991, there's an expectation, and rightly so, that we should be designing the fire alarm system to IS 3218. And this is where the problem is lying. Even if we're putting in a Type M system, the interpretation is being put there by designers, and I'm talking about M&E consultants and say specialist fire alarm companies that we must have sounder coverage in every apartment once we have an IS 3218 system in the apartment. Now there's different interpretations, and I'm saying clause 6641 of 3218 says if on the basis, so I mean clause we'll look at, there's double negatives here. In the design strategy by reference to TGDB and 9991 in conjunction with 3218, you could take a view that there's no requirement to provide sounders off the common alarm system in each apartment by reference to 6641 of 3218. You read it one way because it says on the basis that the fire routine in this case does not require the audible alarm to rouse sleeping occupants. That's one interpretation of that clause. It's an interpretation I've endeavoured to put past fire officers and to say, well, there are sleeping occupants, but if you're saying, no, it's a stay-put strategy because that's the strategy in 9991, then there's no conflict with 6641. Now, I'll quote again from 6641 in the next slide, and you can read it differently. So that's one of the problems. 9991 in TGDB says, well, it's a stay-put strategy that's applicable with non-combustible floor construction. The LGA guide has a similar stay-put strategy. So therefore, what's the problem? You say, we don't need sounders off a common alarm system in the individual apartments, because when you read all the documents together and you read IS 3218 in a particular way, we don't have a problem. But that isn't the case in reality, and I think that's what I want to come back to in 3218. That design strategy that I'm putting to you there is entirely consistent with the design approach followed in the UK and in London generally, and we have in the office lots of information on apartment blocks in London, and there is never a common alarm system in apartment blocks in London that has sounders in the individual apartments, because the stay-put strategy is what's adopted. And you will have common alarm systems typically in buildings to activate smoke venting systems. But then, on the other hand, 3218 says, well, it says you shall incorporate alarm devices capable of providing the sound levels in 664 in each dwelling, and there's kind of, it goes on a little bit, but, and then it says a heat detector sounder connected to a DL3X system shall be installed inside the final exit from each dwelling to the communal corridor stairway and the remote lamp. We're not commenting on that one way or the other. And then it says the sounder inside the final exit of each development may be eliminated if the sound was at the bedhead is deemed sufficient. So it's clear that the intent of 3218 is to require the 75 dBA at the bedhead in every apartment. On the other hand, you could read that other clause to say, where it's a stay-put policy and you don't need to wake the sleeping occupants, then you don't need to do that. But that's not how it's been interpreted. So the problem we have is IS 3218 is being clearly interpreted, as I think it was maybe intended to be interpreted, as requiring sounders in every bedroom, in every apartment, in addition to a sounder in the entrance hall, to meet the 75 dBA, on top of requiring domestic smoke alarm coverage with a domestic smoke alarm also in every room. So you have duplication of systems, and you have conflict with the fundamental design philosophy for apartment buildings, which is a stay-put policy. Yes? So the conflicts are there. I mean 3218 is saying in that clause, a building containing apartments, it should be a type L3X system providing the sound levels as per 664. If you read it this way, that means 75 dB at each bedhead with all doors closed. And the only way to realistically achieve that is to put a sounder in every bedroom, as well as possibly a sounder in the entrance hall, or else put in enormously powerful sounders in the entrance hall that will blow the head off everybody and will probably just about achieve the 75 dBA in at the bedhead. But then 10.3, in terms of talking about the audibility of smoke and heat alarms, which are the domestic interconnected alarms, says all you need to achieve is 85 dBA at the doorway of each bedroom with the door open, which is a lot less than 75 dB at the bedroom with the door at the bedhead with the door closed. So within the code itself, there's conflict. Now the background to the 85 dB and the door being open, that comes from 5839 Part 6. It's still in 5839 Part 6, the current edition. And okay, we can debate, and I've no doubt there'll be a discussion later on about what is the appropriate dB level in an apartment building if you do need to arouse sleeping occupants and if you do need to evacuate, what is the appropriate level? My belief in apartment buildings is that there's a different view taken in apartment buildings in terms of the domestic alarm. The concept is that a lesser sound level is sufficient to evacuate a family unit. So an apartment is typically a family unit, either a family in the conventional sense or a group of people living together, and not everybody needs 75 dBA to wake them. The analysis on the background levels, yes, 75 dBA, the research I think showed was needed to wake 90% of people, something like that. So there's 10% of people that 100 dBA mightn't wake. So it was fixed as a reasonable level. But equally, if you have a group of people that are looking after each other, a lot of people, and it varies across the age spectrum. The younger you are, the harder it is to wake you. The older you are, the easier it is to wake you until you start getting deaf. So the reality is, the background in 5839 Part 6 is 85 dB at an open door, notwithstanding the fact that the British standards at the time had self-closers and bedroom doors, but was deemed to be sufficient to wake the typical family unit, wake somebody in that family unit. But notwithstanding that, I'm saying the Stayput policy, that's appropriate for the domestic interconnected alarm systems in the individual apartments. If we are to look at a dB level and we say we do need to evacuate apartment buildings because that's the philosophy in this country, which I dispute, then I'm saying equally there's a problem with the dB level being set at 75 dB in apartment buildings, which is a ridiculously onerous requirement and inconsistent with the practice in the UK. The conclusion is basically there's an urgent need for amendment of IS 3218 2013 and perhaps some amendment of TGDB as well in the process. And I'll throw the discussion open to the floor on that. So there's a problem there. We've been, and one of the problems I think we're having as consultants, and we're involved in a lot of apartment projects, you'll find there's inconsistency among the fire services on this. And you'll get some fire officers will totally agree with the proposition I've put there. And you'll get others who will say, no, I want a Type L3X system and it must comply to the letter of 3218. So you could have two projects in the same parish with two different standards. So there's firstly a need to get clarity. The department, and there's nobody from the department here that I can recognise, but the department need to get off the fence as well. IS 3218 and SAI, and I have an involvement in SAI, and my good friend Vincent is down there in the audience as the chairman of the committee that's working on the fire alarm code. I think the fire alarm code needs an urgent review, as does TGDB. So that's my conclusion.
Thanks very much, Michael. Any questions? Vincent?
Right, Vincent Carrigan, Chairman of Working Group 3218.
Sorry, I'm just thinking we should try and get some microphones here. Sorry about this. Not organised.
Do I need a microphone?
Well, you speak really loudly. Right.
Well, whatever. Chairman of Working Group 3218, Vice Chairman of the FSSC, of which Michael is Chairman. Now, I do have a few comments. Firstly, Michael, to put detectors in bedrooms in an LD2 system was at the behest of DOE.
Am I live here?
Yeah.
Am I? Is that good? Yeah. Okay. The DOE asked me to put in to include bedrooms, for a number of reasons. One, bedrooms are becoming a hazard. There's all kinds of electronics and PCs and things in bedrooms nowadays, so detection was good. Also, as detectors are joined together, if there was a fire in another part of the apartment, you'd hear it in the bedroom, which is a good idea if you're asleep. So therefore we said, right, we'll put detectors in the bedrooms as well in an LD2 system. And that was the Department of Environment, not me. Therefore we...
and I think in response, Vincent, I'm well aware of that, and I'm not necessarily in disagreement with that change. And I think when I brought that out, that's not where we're at fundamentally at all.
Okay, again, in 3218, we tried to have the standard as an enabling standard so that designers could actually make risk assessments and do the job. And you are a designer of great repute, Michael, but there are many designers around this country who are electrical contractors. I use designers loosely, and systems are being designed by people who haven't a bloody clue what they're doing. But nevertheless, the designer is responsible, and and in the standard we've actually said that the designer should make the decision as to how the sounders are operated. I'll come back to that. You keep talking about a Stayput policy. I've no idea, that there's a Stayput policy in Ireland. I don't believe there is. I don't believe the Department of Environment thinks there is. And you're dragging it in from the UK, where they maybe build buildings a lot better than we do. But a Stayput policy is just not part of where we are.
Who says? Is the response I would make to that. But.
So look, I agree that there has to be a way forward, and I think that you've shown us that there's a lot of inconsistencies between a lot of different standards, and we've got British ones and Irish ones. Well, I think it would be nice if we sort of use the Irish ones, and where's Britain going to be in a couple of years' time, and et cetera, et cetera. So what I think we should do, I'd like, on behalf of the NSAI, to invite your company to nominate somebody to sit on our working group who can thrash this problem out in detail, and with all the backup documents and all the rest of it, to try and come to a solution to this problem, which I recognise. And I think also at the same time, you, Michael, are on the steering group of producing a TGDB Volume 1, which is to come out next year. It seems to be like a total secret as to what's in that document. If you nominate somebody to come on our working group, we would like feedback from the steering group so that we can coordinate. TGDB Volume 2, am I right? Yes, Volume 2 has come out for consideration, at least I've seen it, and lots of people have seen it, and there is total harmony between it and 3218. And when Volume 1 comes out in a couple of months' time, we hope to see harmony between it and 3218. But if there's not, there's time to resolve that, so that the TGDB that comes out next February or whatever will represent the current situation, which you're trying to do tonight. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. I suppose in response, I think, Vincent, the easy option for everybody here is to say, yes, we shouldn't have a stay-put policy, and not alone that, but we should comply to the letter with the current version of 3218, and TGDB should be amended to reflect that. The net effect of that is that you have duplication of systems in apartments. You have the LD2 system, and I do subscribe. I do think the amendment to up the standard in apartments to have detectors in every bedroom is a good idea. It's a low-cost solution, and I'd be more comfortable myself living in an apartment that had them. Notwithstanding, you would say the statistics don't justify it. But in the current system, and we're involved in an apartment block close to here, where with a lot of apartments, and the M&E consultants, who are reputable M&E consultants, are saying to comply with IS 3218, we have to put a sounder in every bedroom off the common system. We have to put an interlinked smoke alarm system in every bedroom and in all rooms in the apartment building. So we have this duplication. You go into a bedroom, you'll see, I have a common alarm sounder here and I have another sounder here. It looks ridiculous. It doesn't make sense in technology terms.
But the objective of an alarm is to awaken sleeping persons if they're asleep.
But we're back to the DB level. we're back to the DB level that's needed, and that's, what I'm saying, the easy option is to be ultra-conservative and not look at the statistics, not look at the evidence, and we tend to do that too easily in this country. Nobody will blame us if we're ultra-conservative, but that's not what good fire engineering is all about. And I'm saying, let's look at the practice in the UK, let's look at the practice elsewhere, but what I'm saying is we're totally at odds with the practice in the UK. Full stop. We're working with some UK developers here, they're perplexed as to what the hell we do in this country, fire-wise. Frank
Pierce. I think you know my feelings, Michael, on a lot of these items, but you constantly refer to the UK. The UK is a different organisation than us. They have great response times in the fire services. They can rely on them. We have very long response times. Also, if you read TGB, it does say that you must not rely on the Irish fire services for rescue. It is not a rescue service. But notwithstanding that, the purpose of the sound levels was to rouse sleeping people. At the stage of design of any building, you have no idea who is in any one apartment. You'll never know, and that will keep changing. It's a fluid item. So they can be disabled people, they can be very old people, they can be pissed drunk for all we know. And we do know that they have to be wakened. You have a duty of care to your neighbours. The only way of providing the sound level is with the 75 decibels. And we do rely on other areas. The 75 decibels is actually also recommended in NFPA. And lots of papers that are written on sound levels are waking people. It depends very much on whether it's REM sleep or NEM sleep, and the 4 or 5 different stages of sleep. And it is very difficult to rouse people from a deep sleep. So it's unfortunate if you happen to be very...
I think, Frank, I'll have to stop you in your tracks there. And you and I have had this debate heated in the past. I'll stop you in your tracks. You're not correct. You're not correct. We are very similar to the UK in lots of respects. There isn't reliance on rescue by the fire brigade in apartment buildings. Many apartment buildings are way beyond the height capability of rescue. The UK statistics show evidently that the majority of fires in apartment buildings do not spread beyond the apartment fire origin and do not require rescue or evacuation of the apartments.
So my point, Michael, on that is...
Another point, and I'll go back again, on the 75 dB and whether it's the absolute requirement in all cases. It's not. I mean, people, it varies across the age spectrum what it takes to wake a sleeping person. Radically. And I mean, my view is in apartment buildings where there's a family group setting, it potentially is a different level. And that's the background to the 85 dB at the open door in 5839 Part 6.
But you do not know at any time of design whether it's going to be a family resident in the apartment or it's going to be a single person or an aged person or what the person is going to be.
Yeah,
so you have to make the allowances at the design stage.
Yeah, but I mean, Frank, you do not know, in general fire terms, you do not know at any time whether a building, if you're so ultra-conservative in building design, you'd build buildings out of non-combustible material, you'd allow no combustibles in because they could go on fire and kill somebody. Fire engineering is about managing the risk and limiting the risk, and it's not absolute. And I think we have to look at it in that context. We've too hard a fixed view on this issue on the committee, and that's part of my frustration. We need to think outside the box. Yes, I'm agreeing that we perhaps should look beyond the UK, but we should look at the UK as well. We should look at what's a sensible solution. There was another solution that I've looked at, which was interlinking. If we felt that perhaps in some circumstances it was necessary to rouse everybody in an apartment block, there is a simple technical solution of interlinking the common alarm system with the domestic alarm systems and avoid this duplication.
But Michael, that very solution which you just proposed and which we know has been used is an unmonitored system. There is no way of knowing whether they're still connected.
More sounders in every apartment building in Dublin. Look, this is the difficulty, and we're not going to resolve it here in an open forum. But I don't accept the contrary view that you're putting forward, Frank, and you might as well know that. I think this has to be done in a very open fashion with representation from people like myself, from fire officers, from the department, because the department need to get off the fence. And okay, the Stayput policy needs to be looked at. I think the Stayput policy is absolutely supported by fire statistics. And I don't think the statistics in Dublin are any different from the statistics in the UK.
We don't disagree, Michael. We do need a solution. That's absolutely right. But it's got to be a proper technical solution. You're talking about interfacing the domestic system with
I'm talking about there's multiple solutions. I'm talking in the first instance about not having...
But they have to be correct.
I'm talking about not having sounder coverage in the apartments, full stop. That's the first protocol. We should say, right, what's fundamentally wrong with the Stayput policy? Why is it not appropriate here? What's right about it? What's wrong about it? The Stayput, the all-out evacuation policy has inherent risks. It has inherent risks that you invite somebody from their safe apartment into a common escape route, and there's a fire threatening that escape route, and they evacuate down the stairs, and they're overcome by toxic gases, and they collapse in the stairs.
And what do you do if you do need to actually activate an evacuation, even for a zone, if you have no sounders? Nothing.
Yeah.
You can't have the firemen walking along knocking on the doors. That's never going to work. So
I'm saying we need to think outside the box here. We've an entrenched position adopted by your committee, and that entrenched position, I'm happy to get involved in the committee and nominate somebody in the committee, but I think the entrenched position has to I'd like to have a chat with you about it, but that entrenched position, we have to have openness in the committee and say, right, this is the way we're going to look at the UK, we're going to look at the statistics, and we're going to evaluate this from a fundamental point of view, and we're going to get a view from the department and various parties, and then we'll come up with a practical solution. I'm not suggesting, in my view, my own honest view, the practical solution is to put a rate of rise heat detector combined with sounder in every apartment. It gives, it's beyond what's needed to comply with TGDB, it's beyond what's needed, and then you decide to program the system how you wish. But you're not necessarily getting 75 dB at every bedhead, but you're getting a very high level of sound in the apartments, which I believe is adequate. That's one option.
Well, as you said, it's not the forum to actually debate it, and I do agree that we obviously need a lot of discussion.
Yeah. I think we need an open mind on all parties. I've quite an open mind, but I think we need an open mind on behalf of the committee.
And there is an open mind.
So unfortunately, we're getting dug into each other at this meeting.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? In your view, Michael Lyons, in your view, did the 2013 version of 3218 usurp the role of TGDB as the kind of the performance guidance document in terms of designing for fire alarm systems? Is 3218 trying to run away with aspects of what TGDB should be telling us to do?
Well, essentially, that's what's happened in the context of, say, the domestic self-contained alarm systems in apartments. It is now setting the standard, whereas the standard was previously set in TGDB in section whatever it is, and it looked for the LD2 to 5839. So that's one area. I'm not necessarily in fundamental disagreement that the LD2 is now defined it was a bad idea. I think it perhaps was a good idea. But equally, it said all apartment buildings shall have a type L3X system, irrespective of construction. That's beyond what TGDB is looking for. And equally, it very emphatically said, whereas TGDB had left it open, it said that the alarm system was there for the protection of the common escape routes. It categorically said, but you should get the 75 dB at every bedhead. So it didn't leave any room for professional judgment to be made as against the previous edition of 3218, as against TGDB. And I think, that's what's happened. I think it's time to roll back and ask the fundamental questions and say, right, what revisions do we need to implement a new code that has a sensible, practical solution that's not so at odds with what's across the water and with current practice, generally. And okay, we should look at other jurisdictions as well in the process, but I think we need an open mind in looking at it. And I think the general consensus of a lot of professionals is what's currently coming out of the 3218 design is over the top, full stop.
Vincent has another question.
Not a question, just as a point of information. Michael, you sort of indicated that the working group in NSAI is some kind of guys who live in smoke-filled rooms or something. It's composed at the moment of major users, the OPW representation, the HSE, a major user, the Insurance World, 2 from the Chief Fire Officers Association, 1 from the Consulting Energy Association of Ireland, 2 from the IFE, and 5 from the fire industry. Now, we would welcome the points you're putting across tonight. We would welcome you or somebody from your company to sit on our committee and tease this out, because it can be teased out. But you shouldn't be killing Irish Standard 3218. And the points that were changes were made with the consent of on the understanding and the demands of the DOE, and they had got a report from Arabs as to how they should proceed, and they told me what to do.
That's very specific, Vincent. No, let's be honest about it. That was it specifically in relation to the domestic alarm system.
Yes.
Yeah, specifically on that. Not in
And the common areas.
No, absolutely not.
Very glad to have it here. We'll talk later. I'm not going to say any more.
Any more questions?
Michael, I'd just like to ask a sort of a different style of question, and that is in relation to the other side of this equation, which is previous events and case histories. And I would cite, for example, the Lachlan House event. And my understanding, and I'd love your opinion on this, or anyone that knows better, that the mood in the UK, particularly in the Stayput policy, has somewhat changed as a result of the Lachlan House event. Would you be able to comment on that for me?
Yeah, I don't think it has necessarily. I mean, the Lachlan House fire has raised questions. Yeah, it has raised questions, but I think the philosophy in the UK, I mean, the reality is that 9991, the current edition, is a 2015 code, and it had some significant changes from the previous edition, but it didn't change in relation to this approach. The Local Government Association guide, I'm not sure how current that is, I think it is quite current, is still reinforcing the Stayput policy. But the significant thing is 9991 of 2015, and it is 2015, I think is the latest edition, had changes from 2011, significant changes in some areas, but not in relation to the Stayput policy. So I do realise that particular of our Lachlan House, or whatever it was called, raised questions about firefighter safety and issues in relation to firefighting tactics. But it hasn't materialised or worked its way into a revision of the code to radically change the code.
Thank you.
Michael, just one small point, just as a matter of information. The requirement for 75 decibels at the bed head to wake sleeping people actually came from the 1989 standard. So it has been in the standard since 1989. It's exactly the same.
Yes, but I think the wording in the 89 standard in relation to apartments was slightly different, and it was
word for word identical. Just for, as a point of information, it's been a requirement since '89.
Well, a requirement. I mean, the Irish standard is not a requirement. It's a design code for fire alarm systems. The requirement is compliance with Part B of the building regulations. Part B of the building regulations in turn refers to technical guidance document B as a deemed to satisfy code. And at the end of the day, it's a functional requirement. Okay, IS 3219 can be used and ought to be used and ought to be usable to support a design. But I'm saying to you, IS 3218 in its current format is not usable in apartment buildings. It's fundamentally, there's a fundamental flaw in there that needs to be sorted out. And maybe I'm repeating myself at this stage, so maybe it's time I shut up.
75 dB came from 5839 Part 1, 1988.
Yeah, that's for but 5839. But 5839 of 1988 applied to Part 1 apply to hotels and boarding houses and typical such cases. Yes, 5839 Part 6 applies to residential buildings, which says, I'm well able to defend the position. We're misquoting here for the purposes of unnerving me up here. The bottom line is 5839 Part 1 of 1988 applied to fire alarm systems across the board, and particularly, say, in residential buildings being hotels and boarding houses and the like. 5588 Part 1 had a Stayput policy and referred to 5839 Part 6 as the appropriate design standard for fire detection and alarm in apartment buildings, which had 85 dB at an open door in the entrance hall. That's 5839's position.
But my understanding of the 85 dB at the doorway was to make it easier for electricians, so that they didn't have to go around with sound meters, because domestic smoke alarms, which had the integral sounder, delivered 90 decibels at 1.8 meters. So if they located the domestic sounder just half meter close to the open doorway, they were assured of getting 85 at the doorway, which meant they got 75 in the bedhead. And that was an industry SOP to make it easier for electrical contractors and electricians.
Possibly so, Michael, but at the end of the day, 85 dB at an open door is not anywhere near 75 dB at a bedhead when that door is closed.
True.
Therefore, somebody back analysed that if we get 85 dB at the open door, the doors ought to be closed because they have self-closes on them, and we'll expect to get 65 dB probably at the bedhead in that situation. And I believe a decision was taken. That's a reasonable proposition in an apartment use, because it's a kind of a family context. And that's what I believe is the background to the lower level in apartments.
Yvonne Wild, NSAI. I'm the technical manager in NSAI, and I suppose I'll be just agreeing with the points that have already been made. It's very important that membership in our committees is broad and that all the stakeholders are engaged. It's very important that any Irish standards reflect Irish building practice and the Irish building control environment. And it's also, we're happy to consider any proposals for revision or review. That's what we're there for. You know, we do deal in many areas of construction and other areas of standardisation with difficult topics which do get resolved within the committees. We do. And finally, just to say, we would welcome if there are other people here in the audience who haven't already contributed or been involved in these discussions. There's room at the table in NSAI for everybody. That's what we're there for. We're about achieving consensus so that the documents stand up. Thank you.
Thanks. Any more questions? Like I said, I'd like to just propose that you show your appreciation to Michael in the usual way. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. I said at the outset it wouldn't be boring, so you certainly weren't. Thank you. Thank you.